Welcome to the first episode of IndyCar Hot Takes. I felt like this was a good opportunity for fans of the sport to sound off on any topic they want, and I'll give my thoughts on it. I'm not necessarily always going to pick topics or hot takes that I agree with. I think the idea here is to create some water cooler talk around the sport of IndyCar racing, which is something I think is sorely lacking right now, and so this show will give us an opportunity to do that. I asked for your hot takes on my community tab, but for the next episode, drop your hot takes in the comments of this video. And we're starting off strong because we had a lot of hot takes revolving around whether or not IndyCar should adopt a new chassis or chassis formula. And Stephen Blakesley had this to say: a new car would not improve the on-track product or affect sponsorship and fan interest. So IndyCar is doing nothing wrong with sticking with what they have. So why not? We'll start with one that I don't necessarily totally agree with. While I think it's subjective whether or not a new car would improve the on-track product or not, I think you would have to look no further than the difference between the IndyCar race and the Indy Next race to see what a newer chassis could bring to the IndyCar racing product. Which is to say that I think the Indy Next race was more exciting, and I think that there are some opportunities with a chassis that was only 3 years younger than the DW12 is, the IL15 that they currently use in Indy Next. It still races better. I think it looks better still than the current Indy car. So consider almost 10 years down the line from even the IL15, how much development work and how much interesting components could be added to the race, or maybe issues with the racing that could be addressed with a blank sheet of paper car. I think the claim that a new chassis wouldn't affect sponsorship or fan interest at all is also a bit wrong, and actually he received a reply which kind of puts it into a good perspective. This comes from Walter Schobkrack. I think I said that right, but he says it could bring in a third manufacturer, which could then draw sponsorship and fan interest. So you kind of miss the essential reason for a new chassis rules package, as IMSA and WEC have shown. And I think Walter's got a really good point. And that's something that modern racing fans, particularly modern IndyCar fans, I think have completely forgotten about and misunderstood. And I understand why, because 10 years ago was the last time there was a new chassis package, and I get it, they've updated the bodywork and there's been engine development over those 10 years. The cars are not exactly the same, but a major rule change has not happened since 2012 for all intents and purposes. I mean, I guess you could consider the aero kits their own separate era, but outside of the 3-year period, and really it was 2.5 where there was actual development of the aero kits, you have had one body kit and essentially 2 engine manufacturers, and that has been what IndyCar racing is. So when you look at the motorsport landscape as a whole, yes, a new rules package isn't an automatic, we're going to have 5 new manufacturers here. But I think keeping things the same is a guarantee that things are going to stay the same. If you never take a risk, if you never change anything, you'll never find that third manufacturer. You'll never see the sport grow past what it is right now. And yes, IndyCar almost implemented a new engine formula. It was only 2.2 liters bigger than the current engines, but obviously one manufacturer, that being General Motors and Ilmor, had trouble getting their engine package working, and that engine formula was thrown out. So now next year we're just adding a hybrid to the existing formula, and we'll see how much, if any, that changes the racing product. But it doesn't seem to have added a ton to sponsorship or manufacturer or fan interest, at least at this time. And parlaying off of that, Logan Fromelt says, my hottest take is that in order to bring in more engine manufacturers, IndyCar should take a sports car approach and let each manufacturer design their engines and then use BOP to bring it to a more competitive field. Or if you want to get real extreme, find a way to use the engines that IMSA teams currently use in an IndyCar and allow manufacturers to enter in 2 series with a single engine. And, without getting too long-winded, I've suggested this before. I think this is a great idea. I think that it would be difficult to retrofit the IMSA engines to a spec IndyCar chassis. My suggestion would be to any manufacturer that's willing to enter IndyCar to just design a total ground-up IndyCar clean sheet of paper design. So, like, have just a Honda IndyCar, meaning a Honda chassis, or whoever they employ to design that chassis, Honda engine, everything, and then BOP that car to whatever other manufacturers choose or perhaps do not choose to build a car in IndyCar. So I think that if we really wanted to look at what would really truly attract manufacturers again, I think a BOP formula is where you have to go. And I hate to say that because I am a purist, but looking at it objectively, what engine manufacturer, what OEM specifically, we need to say OEM because engine manufacturers are a different thing entirely. What OEM is willing to jump into a completely competitive environment where Honda and Chevrolet have had a 12-year advantage in terms of development? That's a tall ask. BOP could be a way to entice them. Napa Racing Fan says Marcus Erickson does not win a race for Andretti Autosport in 2024. Ganassi is performing way better than Andretti. It was a bad deal for both sides. I disagree with this as well. I think that Marcus Erickson will win a race for Andretti Autosport in 2024. I also disagree, in fact, that it was a bad deal for both sides. I think from a sponsorship perspective on the Andretti side, they haven't had an Indy 500 winner on their team since Ryan Hunter-Reay left at the end of 2021. I think that lack of experience has shown in terms of the performance of Andretti Autosport, particularly at the Indianapolis 500. But more to the point, I think Marcus Erickson has always overperformed at any team he has participated at. He was faster than James Hinchcliffe when he raced for Schmidt, and he's certainly proven his worth at Ganassi. Now, is he a match for Alex Palou or even Scott Dixon? Maybe not. But I think going to Andretti, it's not a bad thing for Marcus Erickson. And at the end of the day, it's not a bad deal, especially for him, because he wasn't getting paid at Ganassi, and he's getting paid a tremendous amount of money to drive for Andretti. Jesus Hippie says, the charter/franchise system being suggested will not accomplish anything positive if implemented. I agree. I think that the biggest problem with the charter franchise system that is being floated around, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but Marshall Pruitt had an article on this. The big issue for me, and it's no surprise, would be the idea that you would lock 22 or more spots into the Indianapolis 500 field. And to that end, I say, why on earth would you take the one thing about your sport that objectively works, that objectively gets mainstream auto racing and sports attention? The one thing that, for 2 weeks, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is the center of the auto racing world, and IndyCar, by extension, is as well. And a huge part of that is the fact that the tradition of the Indianapolis 500 is that no one is safe. And so if they got rid of bump day as we know it, it would be a disaster for the sport, to say the least. And, while I think some of the other ideas to try to, add value to having an IndyCar team, I think I'm fine with that. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I think that I agree with your assessment that implementing a charter system is just a way to continue to take the IndyCar series down the path of the status quo. And if anything, locking in spots for the Indy 500 would take that status quo and potentially jeopardize the goodwill and the legitimacy of your biggest event, which is your biggest selling point for the sponsors and partners that are left in the sport. So I think that they need to really take a long, hard look at this and consider what damage they might end up doing to the sport and whether or not those benefits of a charter franchise system outweigh the negative impact that it would have on their biggest and most profitable race. Andrew H. says Felix Rosenqvist is a top 10 driver. He gets treated like a bottom half driver. I would tend to agree with this. I think that Felix Rosenqvist is definitely better than his results show. I think that he has been hindered by the drama surrounding the Arrow McLaren team ever since he joined, frankly. It was a good opportunity for him to take when he had the opportunity, I think. But I would also say that leaving Ganassi was not a great career decision. And especially now that he's been kind of in contract hell with that team for the last 2 years, that hasn't helped things very much. So I think for Felix Rosenqvist, for his career, it would be best to leave that situation and go find a team that will really value him and treat him like the driver that I think a lot of people within the sport realize that he is. David Bateman says Colton Herta needs to leave Andretti. Well, David, I have to tell you that there's about 6.5 million reasons why Colton Herta does not need to leave Andretti. And I understand where, because this was not the only comment that said this. I understand where that comes from. But the reality and the actual fact of the matter is that Andretti can afford to pay drivers to race in IndyCar. They will always be an attractive option to a race car driver who wants to race in IndyCar. So it doesn't necessarily matter what the results are, and it even doesn't really matter whether or not Colton Herta ever gets to Formula One. He's getting paid, so he doesn't need to leave that team. Now, sure, would it be nice if the results were there? I'm sure it would be, but we have to understand the realities of the sport that we're in, and the amount of paid, actual, employed, paid by their team race car drivers in racing is a very small number. And if you can get a big paycheck by going and racing for Andretti, you take that deal 10 times out of 10, and it's not even a question. So Colton Herta, would he be better on Penske or Ganassi? Maybe, but we'll never know that because Andretti is paying to keep him, and I think they will keep him for the long term. Jam Plays Games has an extremely interesting take. IndyCar strategy is actually BS a lot of the time. The structure of most IndyCar events means that less pit stops in a race almost always is the preferred option, meaning almost every race turns into the exact same game of the leading cars just riding around hitting the fuel number. Not helping matters is the fact that the Firestone tires seem to have a gradual fall off, or more gradual fall off than other series. It always goes from my tires are doing well to, oh my god, suddenly there's zero grip and I'm losing 4 seconds a lap and I need to pit immediately. So I think this is a really interesting thought process because at least in terms of the tires, if we're talking specifically about Gateway, yeah, that was definitely the issue. And Scott Dixon even brought it up in the post-race press conference. Now, the thing is that that's a choice by Firestone because they want to make a product that doesn't have any kind of major swings. They don't want to have drivers getting out of the car and saying that the Firestone tires only were good for 4 laps. Even if it would make the racing more interesting, they understandably want their product to be always treated as a quality item. So that's a difficulty, even though I think most people within the sport and outside of the sport would appreciate a little bit more unpredictability with the tires in terms of longevity, not necessarily a safety thing, but just in terms of like overall grip. Though I don't know if it's actually going to happen. The hitting the fuel number thing is also completely agreed. In fact, that was my major criticism about this year's Indy 500. There was a point in the race where they let R.C. Anderson, the leaders of the race, let R.C. Anderson, which was the 30th place car, pass them and tow them around to make fuel numbers. I think that until IndyCar racing incentivizes drivers to go balls to the wall fast the entire race, we're always going to see fuel-saving races because the field right now is so close that there's no way a driver can drive away from the field fast enough in one fuel stint to make it worth their while to run away. So until we see more separation in the cars, we're always going to see these type of fuel mileage races. So that's just going to be part and parcel to IndyCar racing for the foreseeable future, unfortunately. Evan Ducati says Palou is already a top 10 to top 15 driver of all time. I think it's always difficult without the benefit of hindsight to make these kind of claims. But I think there's definitely a case for Alex Palou if he stays in IndyCar. Of course, there's all sorts of rumors about what he's doing and what he's not doing next year. We're not going to get into that. I think the idea here that you are getting at is where he ranks all time in IndyCar. I think he's very good. I think he's well above average, definitely an elite driver in IndyCar. But I would also describe drivers like Jacques Villeneuve, Alex Zanardi, Sebastien Bourdais, Juan Pablo Montoya, even AJ Allmendinger as that type of driver for a time in IndyCar racing. Tony Stewart's another one. But the common theme between all those drivers is that they left in the prime of their career when they really could have thrown up some big numbers. Even Michael Andretti hurt his career by leaving IndyCar racing and going and doing something else. So if Alex Palou stays around, I think you absolutely can make that claim. He's probably an Indy 500 win away from being a top 10 to top 15 driver all time, or like 2 or 3 championships. But I think he's there. I think he is definitely in that conversation right now, but it's going to depend whether or not he sticks with IndyCar racing or doesn't. And parlaying off of that, Micah Smith says, Sebastien Bourdais could have been a championship threat in the early 2010s if he'd had a good ride. He consistently had top 5 speed in very underfunded teams, especially in 2012. Yes, I would say the 2012 Barber race where he took the Lotus Judd engine, ran top 3 until the engine failed, if I remember correctly. That was one of the greatest drives of all time from Sebastien Bourdais, and it's something that's not something that's talked about very much, but it was an amazing drive from Sebastien Bourdais. And certainly I agree that Sebastien could have been that kind of elite, absolutely, unquestionably Scott Dixon style driver that we have hold in such reverence. But the fact of the matter is he left for Formula One. And then after Formula One, he was more focused on the World Endurance Championship, trying to win that with Peugeot. And understandably, he's a driver who was born in Le Mans, France, and he wanted to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and Peugeot gave him the best opportunity to do that. He wasn't even gone from IndyCar racing that long. He ran a partial season in 2011, obviously ran full-time in 2012 and beyond. But yeah, I think that him leaving when he did, which was right around the time of the IndyCar Champ Car merger, hurt him because he would have been with Newman Haas, and that was the best of the merger teams for sure. A team that was capable of winning races with Justin Wilson and Graham Rahal, and even James Hinchcliffe and Oriol Servia had great races with that team. So, Sebastien Bourdais, I think, definitely could have risen his stock in terms of an IndyCar career by sticking around, and would have probably gotten noticed by bigger teams if he had stuck around. But his priorities were in a different spot, which is understandable. And our final hot take of this first episode is Binot, who says letting Randy Bernard go was a massive mistake, and his mindset for marketing/growing the series is sorely needed in modern IndyCar. I would agree, but I think there's a common misconception about current day IndyCar. And I think the misconception is that the IndyCar business doesn't work, which I think it does. The big difference, and the reason why I think a lot of people miss Randy Bernard, is that in the post-Randy Bernard era, IndyCar racing turned inwards. They turned much more to business relationships. They turned much more inward to the 465 area, which is to say very Indianapolis-based once again, a very region-specific series, a series very reliant on not only that business-to-business relationship, but also reliant on the Indianapolis 500 as the reason that the sport continues. And I think that Randy Bernard had aspirations and vision outside of Indianapolis and outside of B2B deals and relationships. He was looking for business to consumer, B2C, out front series partners, ones that would help propel the sport forward. And I think that's a big disconnect now between the media and the series and the fans and the series, is that the series isn't necessarily interested, I don't think, in expanding to certain aspects of the mainstream or doing things the way that kart did, for example, or the Indy 500 prior to 1995 did. I think there are certain aspects that they're willing to push or try to push into the mainstream, but I think for the most part, the business operates through a totally different business model than it did in the Randy Bernard era. And I think the Randy Bernard era, while it had a tremendous amount of mistakes, is fondly remembered by the fans because it was the last time that IndyCar was truly a forward-facing series rather than one that is just focused on, or a lot more focused on, I should say, making sure that their partners are taken care of and that their partners continue to foot the bill to continue to keep the racing series going. I think the current regime is much more interested in continuing with the status quo rather than, changing things that maybe they deem to be unnecessary changes, or even, going after risky business to consumer deals that might backfire in one way or another, rather than just continuing to have business deals that are very much based on people showing up and having a good time in suites, rather than looking at the grandstands and having to explain that to sponsors who are looking to advertise their product to a lot of people. I think that's where the disconnect is right now, and it's mainly in how the business is perceived by people on the outside and how the business is perceived by people on the inside. So I think this was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully this will be a weekly thing. I think it would be kind of cool, especially as the IndyCar season is winding down, to keep discussion moving. So shoot me your hot takes down in the comments section below. I'll be happy to read all of them, and I'm looking forward to the next one.